Good afternoon or good morning to everybody joining us. Thank you for joining our panel on fostering trainee well-being through accountability and collaboration. My name is Kristen, and I'm a volunteer with the Canadian Center. First, allow me to acknowledge the land that I'm talking to you from. So I'm in Pickering, Ontario, which resides on the land within the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Squaw Island First Nation and the William Treaty signatories of Mississauga and the Chippewa Nations. This acknowledgement reminds us of our responsibilities to our relationships with the First Nation peoples of Canada and to the ancestral lands on which we learn, share, work, and live. We at the Canadian Science Policy Centre present this virtual panel that will touch on the systemic barriers that exist within Canadian universities and research institutions and how these barriers can be addressed and ultimately dismantled. Today, we have an impressive lineup of panelists to speak on this topic, and I'll pass it off to Julie Jonkins to introduce them.
Thank you very much, Kristen, and welcome everyone. Before I move forward with introducing myself and our panelists, just a few quick housekeeping notes. We'll be taking questions through the Q&A feature today, and we've reserved some time at the end of the session to address them. And panelists, CSBC will be launching a demographic poll, and we'd appreciate if you could take a moment to complete that so we have a sense of who's with us today. So welcome everyone. My name is Julie Jonkins, and I'm the Training and Research Manager at BioCannerX. BioCannerX is a national nonprofit that funds cancer immunotherapy research from proof of concept to early phase clinical trials. In our field, we see the tremendous promise of therapies for transforming the lives of cancer patients, but also the challenges across the sciences, the economics, and the systems that must be addressed to ensure that all Canadians can benefit. These challenges aren't unique to cancer immunotherapy. Across fields, from climate science, public health, artificial intelligence, we're facing complex problems that can't be solved from single perspectives. These problems demand multidisciplinary collaboration, creativity, and considerations for equitable access and adoption of these new technologies. And yet, our research system falls short of enabling this potential, with funding structures and definitions of excellence that reinforce fierce competition and exclusion. The resulting biases and problematic behaviors weigh most heavily on our trainees, the next generation of researchers we're tasking with tackling these problems. And so today we're bringing together panelists from across the research ecosystem to reflect on this reality. We'll hear the trainee perspective on what it's like to be doing research in this environment and ask our panelists from the ecosystem how universities, governments, and funders can be working to shift this culture and support the next generation of researchers. So with that, I'm very pleased to introduce our panelists. We have Gillian Carleton, a research associate at the Deeley Research Centre in Victoria, BC. The overarching goal of their work is to improve the efficacy and safety of T-cell-based immunotherapies using CRISPR-Cas9 genome editing, with a particular focus on CAR T-cell therapies for ovarian cancer and acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Gillian is also a passionate champion of inclusive research practices at a national and local level, and has served as the member of the BioCannerX Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee and as co-chair of the Deeley Research Centre EDI Committee. We also have Melody Lynch, PhD, who is the Knowledge Mobilization Manager at ArcticNet. Her role is to catalyze a variety of applications of diverse knowledges about the North to support capacity building, policy making, and social innovation. Melody is passionate about collaborative practices of knowledge production and exchange, and is responsible for tracking equity, diversity, and inclusion within the ArcticNet organization. Melody received her PhD from McGill University, where she trained as a human environment geographer and interdisciplinary researcher. Her research has taken her from equatorial to polar regions and is focused on diverse impacts of social and ecological processes for human well-being. She's traveled aboard the research icebreaker CCGS Amundsen and visited each of Nunavut's communities for the How Are We Now Regional Inuit Health Survey. Next, we have Natalie Podospinski, who's a manager who focuses on equity, diversity, and inclusion files in the Discovery Grants and Recognition Division at the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada. She previously was the project manager for the implementation of Dimensions, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Canada, and was the project manager of the Gender Summit 2017 North America. Previously, Ms. Podospinski worked for 13 years in federal politics in different ministerial offices. She has extensive experience in providing strategic advice to senior officials, the development of policies, and writing communication strategies. Ms. Podosvinsky has also experienced the development and implementation of numerous complex projects, such as the Quebec 400th celebrations in 2008, many Francophonie summits, and the place of French during the Vancouver Olympics in 2010. Ms. Podosvinsky has an MA in project management as well as a BA in business administration from the Université de Quebec. Dr. Melinda Smith is an Associate Vice President, Research EDI, and a full professor of political science at the University of Calgary. She serves as co-chair of the President's Task Force on Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Accessibility, chair of the Dimensions EDI team, and lead of the One Child, Every Child Equitable Pathways Accelerator and Equitable Pathways Council. Dr. Smith holds a PhD in political science from the University of Alberta, an MA, an MDA, and a BA in political science and criminal justice from Western Michigan University. She's the co-author of The Equity Myth, Racialization and Indigeneity at Canadian Universities, an editor or co-editor of 7 books, including The Nuances of Blackness in the Canadian Academy and Critical Concepts, An Introduction to Politics. Nationally, Dr. Smith serves on the SSHRC Council and Executive Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada External EDI Advisory Board, Statistics Canada's Immigration and Ethnocultural Statistics Advisory Committee. She is a senior fellow, Massey College, and serves as vice chair of the steering committee of the Scarborough Charter on Anti-Black Racism and Black Inclusion. Dr. Smith is the recipient of numerous awards and fellowships, including a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Calgary Black Chamber, a Doctor of Laws from Simon Fraser University, and a 100 Accomplished Black Women Honoree, a Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation Fellowship, and an ISA Canada Distinguished Scholar Award. So welcome all of our panelists. Thank you very much for dedicating your time to today's discussion. To kick us off, we're going to have some of the panelists do some presentations, and then we'll move into a moderated discussion. So I'm first going to turn the floor over to Natalie for an overview of the Dimensions program.
Thank you. Okay. All right, thank you so much. So I thought I would start with a bigger picture. So I'm, as Julie mentioned, I'm the manager for the Dimensions program, but also the tri-agency, which is NSERC, CIHR, and SSHRC, are working very hard on the EDI file, and that's where actually the Dimensions program initiative was started. So, in our tri-agency statement on EDI, it really says that achieving a more equitable, diverse, and inclusive Canadian research enterprise is essential to creating this excellent, innovative, and impactful research necessary to advance knowledge and understanding and to respond to local, national, and global challenges. So EDI is very much a priority of the tri-agency. And in 2018, various EDI initiatives and programs were actually announced by the tri-agencies. And we took the opportunity to launch what we call the EDI Action Plan. And you can find more details online, which the plan outlines measures to enhance EDI and to do more. We know that in order to achieve world-class research, we must address systemic barriers that have been limiting the full participation of all talented individuals, and must create a culture where embedding EDI consideration into all aspects of research strengthens its validity and its impact. The plan has 2 overarching objectives. The first one is to focus on ensuring that there is a fair access to research funding and to making sure that we have the data to identify the gaps and inequities and to help inform evidence decision-making to address those barriers. We should also examine all policies, plans, processes related to funding and mitigating the risk of bias. We need to recruit diverse participants in peer review committees and advisory or governance committees, and finally, embedding EDI consideration in assessing the excellence of researchers and team-based research of training and also of research design and practices. The second objective is also to foster an equitable participation in the research ecosystem. So the tri-agency helps drive systemic and research culture change such that the number of researchers from underrepresented groups entering, participating, and remaining in the research ecosystem is more representative of the population. So Dimension, more specifically, is a program that was launched in May 2019 to encourage and recognize commitments made by post-secondary institutions toward advancing ADI in the research community. The Dimensions program consists of 3 parts: a charter of 8 principles. You can find the charter online, and a program that recognizes post-secondary institutions in their EDI efforts. And we are about to launch what we call the Dimensions Grants, and more news will come by the end of the year. So the real objective of the program is really to foster transformational change within the research ecosystem across the Canadian post-secondary institutions by identifying and eliminating obstacles and inequities. And we really wanted to create a culture of critical self-reflection related to EDI. And by meaning that is that institutions in Canada should look at their initiative and be somehow critical about some of the work they've been doing, a bit like we do within the tri-agency. And also to support an evidence-based EDI work with using both qualitative and quantitative data. We know that some institutions are gearing the quantitative, but also we want to look at the qualitative aspect of it. And it should also foster a community of practice that shares promising practices and resources, and I'll talk about it a bit later. So why Dimensions was so unique is that it's the most ambitious EDI program for post-secondary institutions in the world. Other countries have similar program, and you probably have heard of the Athena Swan program in the United Kingdom that started this movement, and many countries around the world have decided to use the system, but Canada as the one that is the more comprehensive, because we're looking at more groups than the other countries. And I think what makes it very unique is that it was co-developed with the community. So the institute, we had a cohort of 17 institutions that have invested a lot of time and energy during the pandemic, actually, in the development of the program. So not only they wanted to have a good program, but they had a stake in the game because, you know, they wanted to make sure that the program was really reflective of the Canadian realities. This program creates a drive, you know, within participating institutions to build a community dedicated and striving for EDI. So it's not just a compliance or a competition, it's really to work with each other to make sure that we get somewhere. And the participation in Dimensions is voluntary. There's no obligation for institution to do it. But we had 40 institutions that wanted to be in the pilot, ended up with 17. So that we had a manageable group, you know, to co-create this program. And our new cohort is of 18 institutions. So there's still a lot of enthusiasm about the program. And many of the institutions that were in the program, they often realized that they had consistently been overlooking some role-based groups, you know, that yes, the research culture is not just the research office. You need to look at the full institution. Also, Dimensions for many institutions, it became the umbrella under which all EDI programs were coordinated. So, for example, you know, some big universities have Canada Research CFREF or NFREF and all those CRC program coming from the tri-agency. So often some of the work were a bit uncoordinated and very much occurring in silos. And so those that were in Dimensions told us that it really helped them consolidate the work and making sure that everybody was connected. And also, we really think it provides a unique opportunity to foster that cultural change and then to attract, you know, and retain the talent we're here to discuss. So quickly, the program has 3 principles, and the first one is that the voices of the equity deserving group should be at the middle of the strategy. So everything you do at an institution should have the groups in mind, and you should listen to them to hear some of their challenges. that the practice of mutuality and cooperation really reinforces that an institution's EDI commitment is not just to itself, but to the improvement of the research ecosystem. So that probably many other institutions could benefit from what you have learned, within your own institution. And so the institutions throughout the program, are recognized for sharing their practices, their tools, some of their intervention, and making sure that institutions are not reinventing the wheel every time. And also when it comes to the evaluation of each application to receive that recognition is that it should be context specific. Each institutions work with different contexts, different realities, different regions, sizes, as you all know. And then, so therefore, you can't compare an institution to the other. So it's really based on their own challenges and analysis of gaps and needs. They went as far as they could, basically. So the program has four recognition stages. The first one is the foundation level. You can see it as a bit like the construction of a house. You need to start a good foundation to be able to then eventually go to the transformation level. But it's really conceptualized as a continuum. And each recognition is valid for 5 years. So after 5 years, you can either reapply to the same stage or try to apply to another stage. And the stages has really been developed to highlight that EDI work should be seen as a never-ending or never completed file, because as we know, the world evolves, and so the program should evolve with that. Well, this is a bit it's just a way of showing what we have when we call about the inclusive assessment of the Dimensions program. So as you can see, the voices should be in the middle of the strategy, and then collect some of the quantitative and qualitative tools to build that evidence and that storytelling. So what does your people actually saying about your institution? And then you should respond to the 5 categories of evidence, going from motivation, what are your gaps and needs, but what are also your assets and obstacles, and evidence of where you put your commitment, and was there any change within your institution? It could be a small change or a big change, but I promise that something will change if you enter the Dimensions program, because it's quite an elaborate system. But also really important is the context of where the institution is should really make a difference. So I just want to the institutions who actually, after the pilot, sent an application and did receive a recognition. As you can see, my good friend Melinda from the University of Calgary I had the pleasure of working with her over this process, and I'm sure she will be able to talk about their experience, because the tri-agency is there in support, but the institutions are really doing the work. So this is just a quote from one of our institutions that did receive a recognition, and I think it really tells, that their experience was pretty positive. Their participation has helped to revitalize and bring new voices into our institutional EDI conversation and work. In our engagement, especially with Indigenous peoples, and people from equity deserving groups, the design of the Dimensions program resonated and garnered trust. And I think trust is really important when we do EDI work. So in general, when we talk about advancing EDI across an ecosystem, is really to have that coordinated strategy from the beginning. So often we're just looking at various initiatives individually, but it's better when you have this coordinated strategy from the beginning. Of course, I mean, I think we all realize at the tri-agency level that since it was a government-led initiatives, it really helped institutions get on board, because I think with the amount of funding that the federal is giving, of course, it does give it a little push, but I think most of the institutions that were in the Dimensions program and that are right now in the Dimensions program really are doing it because they know it's the right thing to do, and they really wanted to create this movement and changing the culture within their institution. And of course, we can look at the research sector, we can look at the HR sector, we can look at the students, but really you should look at the whole of the ecosystem because we're all interrelated. And if we're all working in the same direction, it's going to be more powerful. And we can't stress enough how within the tri-agency, we really believe that EDI is part of research excellence. Um, EDI doesn't lower standards. It's just, giving a chance to some individuals to sit at the table, but they are very much qualified to be there. And so EDI should really has had actually a very positive impact on the research and innovation ecosystem. And again, everyone should have that opportunity to contribute, and at all levels. And sometimes people don't realize how some of their efforts and their initiatives, are having a lot of ripple effects. And it happened with Dimensions. It was pretty overwhelming at the end of the program when we took a bit of a break, how people really cared about the program, and some people we didn't talk to before. So I think we can't underestimate some of the efforts we're doing. And I just want to give a shout to some of the initiatives we have in terms of postdoc and at an insert more specifically, and all those details can be found online. But I think we're trying as much as we can to give a space to everyone at the table. So I'll stop there, and then I'm sure there's plenty of time for questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Natalie, for providing that overview. And it's great to hear that there's 18 institutions signing on for the next iteration. And hopefully in our discussions, we can dig more into some of those intangibles, the trust and the ripple effects in our discussion. So next, I'm going to turn the floor over to Melody Lynch, who's going to provide insight into the work that ArcticNet has been doing in this space. Thanks, Melody.
Thank you so much. So you can see my slides okay? Okay, perfect. So thanks so much to the organizers for inviting me as well. I'm really looking forward to learning from everyone here. I'll just share really briefly a little bit about ArcticNet. So if you haven't heard of ArcticNet before, we're a network of Northern Research in Canada. We support research and capacity building primarily in the Canadian Arctic. And our organization just celebrated our 20th anniversary last year. So over those 20 years, we've funded over 300 projects and offered training and support to over 4,000 researchers. So we offer a variety of funding, training, and knowledge mobilization opportunities, one of which is our annual scientific meeting that convenes over 1,000 people from diverse backgrounds, including early career researchers, policymakers, Indigenous knowledge holders, Northerners, industry, and government representatives as well. So we've just launched our new EDI strategy for 2025 to 2029. It was developed with assistance from our partners at Inclusive Kind, and it builds upon our first strategy, which guided our EDI progress from 2020 to 2024. And so our new strategy draws from that and also from stakeholder interviews within our organization and also network surveys to get a bit of a broader reach. So why is EDI important for us as a research organization? Well, our work is deeply rooted in the North. So it takes place on Indigenous homelands. And unfortunately, Arctic science does have a colonial history that we do have to grapple with, even still today. So that's just one reason. Relatedly, science has long excluded certain voices, including women and Indigenous peoples, and ArcticNet is a connector, right? So we to advance knowledge and ideally to strengthen our impact together. So it's really important for us to create diverse and inclusive spaces to kind of foster that more equitable research. So some key milestones so far that we've seen since we created our first EDI strategy in 2020. So we've increased the diversity that we have on our board, on our committees, and also on our funded research teams. And so this diversity is reflected a career stage as well as Indigenous representation. We have offered a number of webinars and training on ethical research, for example, or harassment in the field, and those are most of them are available for free as recordings on our website for anyone to access. We do use an anonymous reporting mechanism called Loop, also provided with the assistance from Inclusive Kind. And so that allows for participants at our events, like our annual scientific meeting, to anonymously report harassment, discrimination, bullying, microaggression, and so forth. So that's really important to our organization. And another milestone that we have is our North by North program, which champions Inuit-led research. So that includes our first, well, the world's first Inuit-led and governed research program. So we think this is really important in order to try to encourage the valuing of diverse knowledge systems and redistributing decision-making power in research spaces. So some focus areas for our new plan includes continuing to embed EDI into our culture. So that's developing and implementing training and performance objectives for staff, for our leadership, and for our board. We're also trying to advance EDI in our broader network. So we're communicating and enforcing our zero tolerance stance on all forms of exclusion in ArcticNet environments. And we're also focused on communicating our EDI progress. So that's providing regular updates and encouraging two-way dialogue on our strategy and on our approaches to EDI. So that's just a really quick overview to introduce ArcticNet and some of the things that we're working on. And I look forward to sharing more maybe throughout the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Melody. And absolutely, it'd be great to discuss some of the lessons learned and impact that your initiatives and milestones have achieved so far. And last but not least, I'm going to ask Dr. Melinda Smith to deliver some opening remarks before we move into more of the moderated discussion.
Good morning, afternoon, wherever you are. Thanks for joining this panel on fostering trainee well-being through accountability and collaboration. I want to thank the organizers for asking me to join this panel. It is a delight to be here and listening and co-constituting the conversation with ArcticNet and Dimensions EDI, which are two of the invaluable mechanisms in Canada to advance equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility in the research ecosystem and the broader society. Our session today addresses one of the most pressing challenges in the research and higher education ecosystem: how to create trainee environments where trainees can thrive, not just survive. And clearly, ArcticNet and Dimensions are invaluable to that process because they aim to reach large institutional environments rather than an individual here or there. It's the systematic approach that they bring to the table that is the difference. Trainees are at the heart of the knowledge society and economy, but they also face systemic pressures in this environment. These are financial, precarity, job insecurity, mental health challenges, and inequities that disproportionately affect women, Indigenous persons, peoples, Black and racialized persons, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, international students and researchers, and of course, disabled trainees. First generation trainees also face particular challenges around the hidden curriculum. This acknowledgement is all the more reason why we need a systematic approach, such as offered through ArcticNet and Dimensions. So we will explore why accountability and collaboration are essential to address and what the evidence shows about best and promising practices. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. We must situate this conversation in the broader climate in which we are doing equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility work. Across Canada and internationally, we know this work is under attack. Critics dismiss it as woke, ideological, as undermining excellence or lowering standards. But this actually is contrary to the evidence. And what we do in EDI work is focus on evidence-based approaches to advancing research excellence. The two are mutually constitutive. But so excellence, the research consistently show, and I recently wrote a piece entitled "The Excellence Dividend: How Diversity and Inclusion advances the research ecosystem," and in which another appeared in University Affairs. And what I show is that institutions that embrace equity and inclusion don't dilute excellence; they actually expand it. By tapping into the full range of talent, by leaving no talent behind, by leaving no talent untapped, universities and research institutes and hospitals produce more innovative research, they produce better teaching and healthier training environments. This matters because when equity-deserving groups face systemic barriers, the entire research ecosystem loses, but so do our societies. Canada's Dimension EDI program, which, as Natalie highlighted, it is the most ambitious in the world. We are interested in leaving no talent untapped. It builds on Athena Swan, but it extends Athena Swan because in Canada, our framework, which I think is globally relevant and significant, shows how embedding equity strengthens excellence. Both programs recognize that when first-generation students, women, Indigenous peoples, Black racialized peoples, 2S lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and disabled trainees are supported, research quality improves. Why? Because diversity brings new questions. It brings new methodologies. It brings new problem-solving approaches. It enhances cognitive justice. It enhances diversity of perspectives. People bringing their lived experience, their disciplinary experiences to the table. So, and that also is the spark for igniting further new ideas and innovations. We are interested in accountability in EDI. Accountability in EDI means ensuring commitments are not just on paper, are not just expressed in action plans, but they are backed by transparent actions, smart goals, measurable outcomes, and shared responsibility. It's co-constituted with the communities. Hence, Dimensions nationally and at University of Calgary focuses on two principles: nothing about us without us, which means what we do is co-constituted with the community, and one size does not fit all, which means, for example, that we know that the things that Black or racialized people might need might be different because of the constitutional context from what we do with Indigenous or racialized persons. But there are also intersections. The value of Dimensions and the value of this kind of work and an EDI action plan in any of the research initiatives is that it helps us to focus on achieving results, not manufacturing or engineering the outcomes, but creating the enabling environment which ensures that people's talents can flourish, and they in turn leads to research excellence. Without accountability, EDI risks becoming symbolic, performative. For trainees, accountability translates into fair mentorship, ensuring that supervisors provide not just technical training, but also career guidance. Safe reporting mechanisms, enabling trainees to raise concerns without fear of retaliation. And equitable access to funding and opportunities, addressing disparities in who gets scholarships, who gets grants, or leadership roles. In other words, we know that the barriers and biases that impede access and opportunities and success varies by equity-deserving groups. What EDI action plans, what Dimension Connect do is ensure that those barriers, those biases, those self-perpetuating inequities are removed in order to ensure that more researchers, more research trainees can survive and, beyond survival, flourish. Accountability also requires institutions to publicly track progress, not just talk, but doing the walk. Data disaggregated by gender, race, and other equity markers reveals inequities and guides targeted interventions. Evidence-based means that the actions undertaken can focus on ameliorating the inequities, removing the barriers, mitigating the biases in order that each equity deserving group and everyone can flourish. It's also, this panel is also focused on collaboration in EDI. It's an intentional partnership across roles, across disciplines and communities to dismantle those barriers and build inclusive environments. Collaboration matters because well-being is never an individual responsibility alone. In the research ecosystem, it is our shared responsibility. The Scarborough Child talks about mutuality. It is about mutual commitment to each other. Indigenous people talk about creating ethical spaces and ethical relationality. This is what collaborations help us to do. So collaboration ensures that trainee voices shape institutional policies. Faculty and administrators co-create solutions rather than imposing them, and peer networks and cross-institutional alliances reduces isolation. When collaboration is prioritized, responsibility for change is shared. Trainees are not left to carry the burden of navigating inequities alone. We are in this together, all working together to ensure equity and fairness and research excellence. So trainee well-being, let me just say a comments so we can open up for questions shortly. Well-being must be understood holistically. It is not simply the absence of stress. It is not simply about mental and emotional health and well-being, where we address burnout, anxiety, and depressions. Those are pressing concerns, the evidence does show. It's also about physical health and lab safety, ensuring safe working conditions. It's about financial stability, living stipends, fair wages, and reduced precarity. It's about work-life balances, policies that respect families, family time policies, and personal commitments. It's about mentorship, but also sponsorship. Beyond guidance, creating opportunities. When trainees can't be in the room, you are the voice that actually promotes them. You actually opens doors, create access for them to have network opportunities. Inclusion and belonging, freedom from harassment, discrimination, and marginalization, vital to trainee well-being. A narrow focus on wellness workshops, for example, misses the broader systemic and structural pressures trainees face. So let me just say, turn to systemic supports and interventions, mindful of time. Evidence shows that systemic interventions are more effective than individuals' ad hoc solutions or one and done workshops, for examples. Whether we think about the American developed residents and fellows a toolkit with structured steps for addressing burnout, identifying stakeholders, assessing programs, and implementing systemic interventions. The Canadian Council of Academies found in their 2021 report found that PhD students face precarious paths, that study came out last year. Precarious career paths, financial insecurity, and high stress. These challenges are magnified for equity-deserving groups and international trainees. The evidence is clear, and that's what we focus on, evidence-based analysis. We cannot wellness workshop our way out of systemic problems. Institutions must address structural inequities to support well-being, which is why a program like a Dimensions is so invaluable because it looks at the whole picture. So mentorship and support, I'm going to say we know we need these. Mentorship provides advice, but sponsorship goes further, using one's influence to open doors, nominate trainees for awards, or advocate for opportunities. Trainees consistently report that sponsorship, not just mentorship, is what advances careers and improves well-being. Curriculum and skills development. We know from the research that not everyone is going to be in the academy. So well-being improves when trainees programs integrate career preparation, writing and research support programs, conference and presentation workshops, career development programs. Tri-agency pilots demonstrate that integrating equity into career preparations improve retentions among marginalized trainees. This makes career development not just a personal skill, but a structural equity intervention. And just two more comments. Navigating transition. Transitions such as moving from undergrad to grad or from PhD to postdoc are especially vulnerable times. And so the Accreditation Council for Grad Medical Education emphasizes that these periods carry heightened risks of burnout. The Canadian Council of Academy study also found that equity-deserving groups trainees are less likely to benefit from informal networks and smooth transitions. Therefore, institutional support, structured onboarding, peer mentorship, and alumni networks can bridge these gaps. Many people are turning to technologies can be an ally in supporting trainees. I have some interest in artificial intelligence, but also some reservations, especially for those of us doing EDI in Canada. Much of the advice they give you are shaped by our neighbors to the south, and there's a different kind of constitutional, historical, and contextual context for this work. But digital also reduce isolation, especially for international and marginalized trainees. But be cautious. Technology must complement, not replace human mentorship, equitable policies, and accountability. And if you're in the far north or remote areas, however, technology can be invaluable. So to achieve excellence in trainee well-being, we must demonstrate that achieving it requires a comprehensive, evidence-based approach, such as the dimensions EDI action plan requires. Accountability and collaboration must be embedded in institutional culture. Mentorship and sponsorship must be prioritized. Career pathways must be transparent and secure. Structural inequities must be addressed to support equity-deserving groups. And excellence in research cannot be separated from excellence in trainee well-being. Healthy support to trainees produce stronger research, stay in academia and beyond longer, and contribute to innovation. It's time when EDI initiatives are politicized and under attack, we must underscore this point. Supporting trainee well-being is not ideological, it's evidence-based. Inclusive and supportive research environments yield better science and better results. Trainees who are supported remain in the system longer and contribute to innovation. Equity is not a distraction from excellence, it is foundational to it. This is what I mean by the excellence dividend. By investing in well-being, equity, and collaboration, we invest in the future of research and innovation in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Smith. You've really articulated the gravity of the discussion today and what's at stake, and really how integral these systematic approaches our panelists are engaging in are fundamental to the shift in their culture. And just picking up on the accountability, I think I'd love to hear from the panelists too, as you talk about the work you're doing, what that accountability looks like for you, and moving beyond performative and ensuring that we're having impact in the actions that we do take. So thank you to all of our panelists for helping set the stage here. With that, we're going to move into the moderated discussion part of our panel here. And I'm actually going to turn our first question to Jillian, who is our providing the trainee perspective. And, Jillian, you've heard from all of our panelists about what's going on in the system, but I would really like to hear from you, from your personal experience and from your work that you've done with other trainees. What are trainees experiencing? What is the research environment actually like? What is it like to be a researcher right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, to be honest. We talked a little bit about this yesterday when we were brainstorming ideas, but I think two of the biggest things that I see facing the trainees right now is they're, I think, quite closely related, to be honest. Probably one of the most immediate and pressing concerns, as always, is financial stability. But financial stability, it's more than just, I think, what a student gets paid at the end of the day. Having students being treated like cheap labor historically has just led senior researchers and PIs to, I think, just undervalue them. It's created this system where PIs do not value necessarily the work that their students do in their own right. Students are really treated as just a way to churn out manuscripts and then leave and go on to other things. So trying to increase student stipends, which has moved forward a little bit in the past couple of years, I would say, is generally met with a lot of backlash, because there's just been this intrinsic value system that's been put in place that now has to be challenged, that suddenly what we're saying is that students are actually a lot more valuable than they've historically been treated as. And that's very challenging, I think, for some people to come to terms with. So I would say, yeah, finances are always a very, very prevalent issue at the forefront of most graduate students. I would say the second most common thing that I hear about from trainees is honestly the culture, the environment, the way that trainees get treated, the way that their ideas and their work gets disparaged or cut down, oftentimes publicly, oftentimes by senior leaders in front of their senior leaders' friends, conferences, at meetings, at departmental seminars and stuff like that. I brought this up kind of right after talking about finances is because I actually do think the two of these are connected. I think this really is connected at a base level, the idea of how much do we value our graduate students. If we have paid them crap for a really long time, we tend to assume that the work that they do is crap and not very high value. Therefore, it's very easy to kind of publicly demean them, thinking, well, their work's not worth very much, right? So I think that that's a challenge. It's a very systemic challenge, to be honest, because that's really a culture shift. I think for that to change requires a huge culture shift. And trying to just pay trainees more is part of it, for sure. But I also think the processes by which we evaluate and critique trainees' works, especially in the public space, and especially in front of colleagues, also needs to change. And that, unfortunately, I think isn't going to really go away on its own. It really needs leaders at a very senior level to be made aware of it as a problem so that they can start leaning on their colleagues who engage in that behavior. But it has to really come from the upper level, because someone who's a more junior researcher like myself can stick up for grad students all that we want, but my voice is not nearly as powerful as somebody who, say, leads the research institution, right? So, I mean, I would say, yeah, finances, the daily culture and the environment, those are probably the two of the biggest ones right now, I would say.
And can I follow up and ask, like, what impact do you see that having on trainees? What is at stake for the individual trainees?
Yeah, I mean, so many trainees are dealing with mental health challenges right now. And I think part of that comes from the nature of it, you know, when you're taking on graduate school, whether it's master's or it's a PhD, it is a huge undertaking. It's a very stressful undertaking, as it is just the idea of being solely responsible for the creation of an original piece of work that is going to be met with challenges over the course of however many years it takes you to get that done. It's just a stressful undertaking as it is, and we should be commending students for undertaking that. And then some of the practices and policies that can be put in place to help trainee well-being should really be focused on eliminating that sort of stress, right? But it's this kind of corrosive mentality that is really just compounds on top of something that is already very stressful. And so you have so many students who that additional level is kind of like that final straw, right? Like it goes from being something that's challenging but manageable, challenging but achievable, to being so challenging that it's like fight or flight or freeze. They're not in a place where they feel empowered to rise to a challenge. They just feel completely beaten down by it, right? And I think the students who are in that second position, where they no longer feel supported, they no longer feel empowered to like try and meet the demands, they're either going to be taking much longer to finish their degree, which is challenging for them because that's another year or two at a pretty low stipend. Can also be challenging for the labs if the lab hasn't budgeted for that additional stipend for a year or two. It's challenging from a productivity standpoint if a student wants to go on and do a postdoc or something like that, but it's taking them additional time to get their like first author publication out or something like that. That's again delaying their career. There's also students who are just leaving, students who just leave the program because they're not supported. And I think that, I'm just thinking about what Dr. Smith said earlier about these kind of evidence-based practices. And I think one of the ways of maybe trying to bring this to the attention of the people who need to see it is some sort of statistics about retention. What does the retention look like? How long is it actually taking students to finish their programs now? Because I really think that should be a driving motivation for people to start changing their behavior. If they can see that it is like, regardless of whether they actually care about the students or not, I can't force someone to care about a student, right? Although you hope that they would, given their position. But if you can see like, financially, this is going to be a drain on your lab. From a productivity level, this is going to be a drain on your H index or whatever, right? If there's something like that could, like that evidence that could show why it's so problematic, maybe that would be helpful.
And I think that speaks to Dr. Smith's comment earlier too, that powerful statement, well-being is never an individual responsibility. And when it's the structural components that are impacting personal finance, career progression, even completing the program, I think that's a very clear indication that there's a larger problem. Dr. Smith, I'll go over to you if you have a response to that, or if you want to share any insight into how we got here, what your experience was like in graduate school compared to now.
You know what, my decades back memory. Actually, because I see continuity and change. So let me just first say I really appreciate what Jolene had to say. And this and it comes to partly changing the mindset, but also changing the culture of the research, not the research ecosystem, too big, labs, training departments, faculties. I often talk about departments, for example, or institutes as the gateways into the academy, but they also can be kind of the barriers within the academy. That's where a lot of stuff happen, which determines whether trainees stay and flourish, or whether they burn out or are pushed out. And in my career, I know of a lot of women who, I think because of harassment and other kinds of things, were pushed out. They didn't finish, but also then because of the culture of the department, other people didn't take them on as supervisee. So there's a lot of, I think, like someone can say to me, this is an antidote. Yes, that's the problem. We don't engage in the sufficient research necessary to say what are the experiences, and then what are the tailored interventions do we need to do the change. So I'm hoping we move beyond this discursive approach to EDI to actually thinking about the evidence-based approaches. But the second thing I would say is what I heard was that in some ways the researchers, undergraduate, masters, PhDs, postdocs are indispensable. Let's just say they stop. went on strike, didn't do anything. How far would most of us who are full professors or researchers get? And this is what we don't understand. Research is co-constituted. And the knowledges, and I think we are missing out as researchers by not paying attention to the ideas and perspectives that students are bringing because of their lived experiences, because of their their backgrounds, or because of their own knowledges, their own research. They are bringing new questions to the table, new ideas, and it seems to me this is what Hofstra's work highlighted when they talk about the innovation paradox, the versus innovation paradox, right? People, the researchers, more seasoned researchers, are ignoring this innovation potential dividend because they're ignoring the questions and the ideas and perspectives of research trainees. I mean, it's kind of, they'd be ignoring the very potential for our own flourishing. So that doesn't mean we won't have some success, but the success can be even more if we treated everybody well and learn from them. So I'm hoping that part of this conversation can shift us away from just thinking about trainees as additive to trainees as transformative, and recognizing the co-constitution of knowledge as vital for the next generation of Canadian research and innovation. So I'm sorry that the culture is still in some ways very hostile. It's disrespectful. What I would say is what that suggests to me is for all the workshops we've had, they are not enough. That something needs to be done with how we actually train the trainers. And that actually requires a deeper vision of equity and inclusion.
Thank you. I think that's such great discussion already. And, I think that idea of training researchers to be the mentors, being the supervisors is such an important key in this. And I do want to zoom in on, there's so many factors, as Jillian has talked about, in the system, but specifically I want to zoom in on the student-supervisor relationship, in particular because of the strong hierarchy there and how that contributes to power imbalance. And the PI often has so much impact on the outcome of a student's performance or lines of inquiry or curiosity within the program. And at the same time, that also, we also rely on the trainees to be the ones to self-report when there's, abuse of that power. So I'm looping in accountability. I want to go to Melody and actually hear more about your loop reporting tool and how your network has implemented that as, I guess, a mechanism of accountability to monitoring the abuse of that power in your network.
Yeah, thank you. So we do use the Loop tool that I mentioned earlier. It's provided by our colleagues at Inclusive Kind. So it's an anonymous reporting tool, and we use it at our conferences every year. So if people don't feel confident, raising their voices to speak up against harassment or any other kind of inappropriate behavior, they can report it anonymously on the tool. And for that, we also have a counselor from Inclusive Kind at our conferences, and we have a room dedicated for that. So both of those tools and services, they go together, and they have been used at our conference. And in addition to that, we have our code of conduct for the conference and our EDI strategy that has a section on consequences that does encourage accountability for us at ArcticNet. And so it has happened in the past where we had to ask somebody to leave our conference based on a report through this service. So I think that, having the policies be there, be clear, be communicated, in addition to having the tools to try to encourage people to report these kind of behaviors, it's our way to try to encourage that change. And try to build more inclusive environments at our conference. And so that's what we've done in the past. And going forward, we're trying to not only encourage that use at our conferences, but also in all ArcticNet funded research environments. So that includes in labs and in field work. And so that's where it gets a little bit tricky because ArcticNet, we can't be everywhere and we don't have authority a lot of the time to take action. So that's something that we're looking into going forward.
Yeah, that seems like one of the mechanisms that we can actually take action and consequences on some of these initiatives. And Jillian, I was curious if you wanted to speak on this as well, thinking specifically about funders and how many funders will ask for, say, EDI statements in grant applications. Any thoughts on what funders could do so that that isn't a performative measure and that it actually is something that has consequences and actions that result from that?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of grants now ask as part of the grant application process for either an EDI letter, an EDI statement. Some like BioCounteracts I know actually asks for some EDI related initiative that will be undertaken during the time in which the PI holds those funds. I do think this is a great start, but there's no accountability for it whatsoever. There's also no way of ensuring that that letter or statement is actually written by the person who's applying for the grant. It's almost always handed down to an EDI committee or a trainee to write it. If there are initiatives that are proposed, there's no way of following up. There's no deliverables. There's no reporting. So I do, and this kind of just leads into this accountability aspect, right? So right now, I would say researchers are mostly accountable to the funds that they are given. I would say that is the strongest determinant or the strongest force that we can use to try and shift behavior into a more positive direction is using the money, right? Following the money. And so the idea of funders, funding organizations trying to ask for more accountability from the people who receive their money, whether it's, what is the EDI related initiative that you're going to undertake during this, 2-year grant tenure or whatever. And then where is it? Where are the results? Where's the report? You have to deliver something concrete. It's not just you said you were going to do something great to get the money and then you never did it, right? But I also think I just kind of wanted to go back into what Melody was saying about the reporting and accountability and stuff like that. So I'm sure that I know for sure that there are tons of trainees nationwide who would, if they knew that there would be no recourse against them, be very happy to use an anonymous reporting tool against various people in their facilities. However, because there is no guarantee that a person who has been reported will face any sort of investigation, that there will be anything done, most people are not willing to engage in that. They're in too precarious of a situation to potentially put themselves into this position where their PI or whomever will figure out that they were the one who made the report. Because realistically, if you have small enough labs, you're going to know who said something, right? So I think this could tie back into the funding aspect of things, where if institutions have some sort of yearly report card or assessment for each of their professors that is in a mentorship capacity, and if there are criticisms or comments or complaints that have been made against their behavior, that an investigation or some action should be taken where their funds should be put on hold while that investigation is happening. And the problem I know with proposing these sorts of ideas is that funders will be like, well, that's our money, but this person's employed by the university, therefore we have to bow down to the university. And then the university will conveniently say, well, they're employed by us, but that funding comes from not us, therefore we actually can't enforce it at all. And everyone just passes around the responsibility until nothing gets done. So I think that accountability is a huge part of it, but also there needs to be a major, transparent decision that is made as to where the lies, who has the power to enforce these things. Because until somebody decides we have the power to hold people accountable, we have the power to control their finances, or we have the power to investigate behaviors, nothing's actually going to happen at an actual systemic level. It may happen in, like Melinda said, if you have a department that's very proactive, a single institution that's very proactive, yeah, you get small chunks here and there, right? But we want this to be broader. We want this to be some nationwide mechanism, right? And until there's an agreement, maybe there's agreements between institutions, host institutions, and granting organizations that gives power to one of those, whichever group it is, to hold people responsible. Until we have that, there's not going to really be a big change, I don't think.
Thank you so much, Jillian. I'm actually going to just pause and open up to any other panelists who want to comment on that, how researchers are accountable to funders and how, we put a lot of onus on students to take the risk to speak up, and how players in the ecosystem can help there. Any comments from the other panelists?
Let me say this. I have a colleague at University of Calgary who is in the research service offices, who does I'm going to call it EDI-led education, Jaya Dixit. And so part of this request for diversity statements or EDI statements, and it's going to come back to the accountability piece, is that, and who actually writes them, is to actually hold sessions for researchers to say, here's how you think through what the expectation is of you, and here's how you write it with outcomes that you are responsible for. And so this is important. Outcomes for which you are responsible, which means you're saying, I'm going to be accountable for these kinds of things I'm saying. This is how I comport myself, how my lab operates, means that you actually need to close the loop. Who follows up to see if the claims made were actually achieved? And if they weren't achieved, that actions would be undertaken to ensure a better outcome. And this is one of the findings, I think, of the equity, diversity, inclusion in the post-secondary research system, the expert panel on EDI practices for impactful change. That's studied by the Canadian Council of Academies. This is one of the findings they had. Solid practices, good practices, which, it could lead to kind of really superb EDI statements with all the accountability measures, and maybe the researchers are them. But who checks to see if that has been done? And if you don't check to see if it's been done, you can't say whether things improve or are getting better or staying the same. And this is what's worrisome for me around trainees. If they're being pushed out, if they're being burning out, if they are facing hostile environments, they have family-friendly policies aren't there, they're not being paid well, their ideas are being appropriated. These are some of the concerns I've heard since I was a grad student. We're still hearing them, which begs the question about the learning environment in which we are in. And universities are supposed to be the best of the best for learning environments. But I think part of the problem is we don't have an accountability loop where people are held accountable for what they put in the grant applications to get the money, and do they deliver on the outcomes, and who checks to see that?
I'm already thinking of ways, even as our organization, can make improvements here. So thank you. I'm myself, I'm learning a lot through this discussion. I'm seeing great questions in the chat. I just want to maybe move the discussion to one more topic before we kind of look at some of these questions from audience members. And Dr. Smith, in your opening remarks, you talked about our definition of research excellence. And I think one of the shifts where we are seeing good movement is, the tri-agencies are moving towards the narrative CVs. We're having the adoption of the DORA principles. So I'm curious to hear from you, Natalie. What change are you seeing, and is there resistance, or any signs of change, I guess, in how we measure excellence and research outputs?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is an evolution of this file, and I think we've seen it during our Discovery Grants competitions also, that the researchers are looking at different aspects now of the research of an individuals who are applying to the tri-agency. They're not looking just at the metrics, of the big scientific review or publications and stuff like that. So people are looking at different aspects of their work. So I think that's a positive. I think the work that the Tri-Agency has done over the last over 25 years, to be honest, I think it's starting to really get a bit more recognized and embedded in what we do. I think there's still a lot of work to be done. I mean, there is resistance out there. I mean, you see it in you would see our clippings, media clippings every morning. We always have one article in the National Post, or and I think you attest to that also, at the different parliamentary committee that also are addressing this issue. Look, of course, when you're trying to disrupt, sometimes what we think is the way to do business, there's always resistance from individuals. I think it's part of what we do. But I think there's a sense out there also that the work is important and it needs to continue. And I think the fact that we have 18 institutions that decided to come back to the Dimensions program from the different provinces, I think it is a testament, that people in those institutions really want to see change because they're the ones who actually live it day to day, right? And so I think we all know that there is a cost of doing nothing also. So I mean, I know there's always, oh, it costs money to do EDI. Well, it costs money not to do it also. So as an administrator, I know that, if you're losing some staff, if you're losing from students, you need to find another one. So, there's productivity issues. There's a lot of things, that are happening in the realm of this that people don't really want to look at, but there is a cost to do that also. I just want to quickly say that there was actually a study in the States that were done over, I think it was over 20 years. It's called Talking About Leaving. It was done by many researchers, but they looked at the reasons why students were leaving the post-secondary sector in the States. It was a major study. You can find it it was published by Springer. And I'm sure some of the conclusion of that report could probably be related in Canada also. So I think, yeah, and to Jillian's questions about the funders, I think we want to also evolve in the EDI realm, and I think it's a questions we ask ourselves many times as to how can we make those researchers a bit more accountable on their EDI statement and not have a canned, and because many of many faculties, or professor are like, what should I say to get it? And it's like, I'm not going to give you that answer because you need to figure it out yourself, right? And I think it's the job of both us and the institutions to be able to say to these individuals, I think you need to think about it and not just write something just to get it, right? And within the Dimensions program at the institution level is that when you're reapplying to either a different stage or even to just renew your recognition, we're going to look back at the first action plan you submitted and question you, like, did you actually do what you said you were going to do? Because that's the only accountability we can do, right? It's just, you say you're going to do all these things, did you achieve them? And if not, like, what stopped you, basically? Because I think for many institutions, they want to showcase their shiniest, their institution in the shiniest way, right? Which is, I mean, it's totally understandable, but I think the accountability is also to your clients and to your staff, right? So if they see the action plan that's just submitted, I think many of the staff and some of the students would tend to argue with some institutions to say, you put that on paper, but I'm not sure this is my experience, within your institution. So, and I think the more we have that safe space or that trust space that Julian talked about a bit, um, students should be able to challenge the system, and make us, think a bit further about what we do. Because as managers, as leaders, we do have a sector. So I think we're conscious of that.
Thanks, Natalie, for adding on that. And it makes me think, with dimensions, a key principle of it is that iterative process where each institution reflects at each stage. You almost wonder if a similar principle could be applied to the individual investigator, where, like you said, you're looking back and seeing how much progress, where have you come and where are you going? So thank you for that. I'm going to turn to the Q&A because we do have some great questions here, and I want to make sure we have time for audience questions as well. And I think the first question, I don't know if our panelists can see this, I will read it out, but I think it relates to what we've been talking about with the student-supervisor relationship. So they said, from my perspective, as someone who's moved from the research pipeline, from graduate trainee to postdoc to NSERC fellow and lecturer, a systemic issue that stands out is the lack of agency for trainees and the concentration of power in the hands of the PIs around research direction, publication, and access to opportunities creates an extractive model. So they're asking, how can we reform this system so that trainees genuinely can apply agency to their training and their own growth? So I'll open up to any of the panelists who might want to comment on that.
I mean, those who so there's a couple of things. The one is the environment in which the environment the institution helps to support, including, I know faculties of graduate studies departments have rules around how you treat graduate students. Those rules include how you value their ideas, how you do not appropriate their ideas. There's consequences if you do, and that's not just for PIs, but also for other students, if you and so on. The dilemma is these are very individualized interventions. And often they're very confidential. So I'm going to say very confidential interventions because they're between you and potentially a supervisor if there's a power imbalance or a relationship. It's very hard then to step back and say, okay, how many times does this happen? So that we know now it's a culture of the department or a unit or a lab or a systemic problem across the lab and the department. Because of the nature of these individualized reporting things, it means then it's very hard to see the systemic, or that whoever is getting the reports needs to be able to pull them together. And that often runs into questions of privacy and join the lines. So I do think that has been a challenge. I'm not sure we have closed the gap. That's one thing. But it was a problem when I was a student. It was a problem when I was associate chair graduate at the University of Alberta. And I well imagine that we haven't fully resolved these kinds of issues if we keep hearing the challenges now. I also think the idea of the professor as sovereign, especially in some disciplines, it's actually quite concerning. And so I think the more we move away from a collegial environment, and when I say collegial in the traditional historical sense, colleagues meant students, staff, faculty, senior leaders. We were all colleagues in a collegial environment in a university. I may be outside the box because I actually still prefer this model of us as all colleagues because we are accountable to each other in that sense. You start bringing in hierarchies of, that's vertical. It's more like a military style approach into universities, top down. I think this is disruptive to a healthy environment. Because then it does become extractive, it does become punitive, it does become adversarial. So how we think about the governance relationship, participatory, collegial, inclusive, really matters. I am always concerned about EDI work when, as a political scientist, we pay insufficient attention to power or the quest for power or how power corrupts. I have no illusions about the relationship of power. Even for those of us who are espousing a commitment to equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, or decolonization even, power matters. And if we are not empowering or enabling or supporting our trainees, then it seems to me we are reproducing the system, which is in which some are seen as disposable, indispensable, because we can't do what we do without trainees, but also at the same time disposable, interchangeable. And that's a disrespectful environment. There's no getting around it. It's fundamentally disrespectful. So I put the onus on universities, on institutes, on hospitals, on training spaces to move beyond beautifully crafted statements, well-crafted definitions of respect, well-crafted definitions of these kinds of things, to saying, how do we embody them in practice? And it's not just how do everybody else embody them, it's how do we. And so it seems to, I think, so I think we have, for all our decades of work around EDIA, equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, decolonization, I still think these remain fundamental questions because we still have this hierarchy and power relationships that we don't want to name and confront in a meaningful way.
Thank you. That's so important to recognize. And I might just flip the question slightly for Jillian and for Melody, having recently graduated as well. Is there anything that mentors or investigators in your experience have done who have made it feel like you could take agency in the pursuit of your studies and take a risk or pursue something that maybe is out of the traditional expectation?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So I think it kind of goes back to what Melinda was saying, the idea of having a collegial environment rather than a hierarchical one. So my PhD, I would say, is a friend and a colleague. And I'm well aware of how lucky and how rare that is to have had just a very friendly, kind of cooperative working environment in which I had a lot of agency over the direction of my research. However, I still believe that the reason our relationship developed like that is because I started graduate school when I was a lot older than my peers. I had already had a previous career. I was really unwilling to settle for being treated like garbage. And I'm also very confident advocating for myself after years of doing it in other environments. So I think that maybe had I been a different style of student, one who was younger, one who was not quite as sure of their role in the lab, the relationship may not have developed the way that it did. And that I've been thinking of actually is that, so, when I graduated, and then I had been trying to get positions as a lecturer, and I had my first term as a lecturer over the summer. And I've always wanted to teach, and I've always thought that it was just such a privilege to be able to teach, and I've wanted to learn about, the actual science of becoming a better teacher. And it really blows my mind how many PIs have actually no interest in that whatsoever. They are interested in their research, and they are maybe fantastic researchers with great careers and lots of papers and tons of knowledge translation and mobilization maybe, but their lack of interest in actually being a good mentor, being a good teacher is shocking to me. So, and it kind of goes back again to what Melinda said, if you treat all of your trainees as disposable, very easily replaced, then you never have to look critically at your own skills as a mentor because you think if something's not working, I will just replace it. But I do think that maybe these student and supervisor relationships could benefit from some sort of mandated training program for supervisors where they actually have to do training to learn how to communicate properly, to understand the power dynamics. It seems that so many people with so much power are really unaware of how that makes their students feel. And they're constantly asking, well, why isn't my student coming to me with these problems? Why are they scared to talk to me? And it's like, I just don't understand how in this day and age you could be unaware of such a massive power imbalance or have never been educated about it. And unfortunately, the people who are actually interested in being good supervisors and being good mentors are the ones who, of their own volition, will seek out webinars like this, will seek out the additional training. They will participate in conferences. They are motivated to learn and to understand. And because of that, as long as we give them the resources and the environment to learn, they will learn and they will thrive and they will foster and they will have these great, relationships with their students, right? But it's the ones who actually have no initiative, no interest, have never thought to educate themselves because it's never occurred to them. I think that's that population that's a bit more problematic, where I think the sort of training for how to be a good mentor and how to be a good supervisor has to come down from on high because we won't reach them otherwise.
Yeah, great points. Thank you, Jillian. I'm looking at the time. I wish we had more time because we do have two additional fantastic questions in the chat box. But I guess I'll say to those people, reach out if the panelists are okay to continue the discussion, because that's, I think, one of the takeaways that we're all hoping for to come out of this session is really to continue the conversation and really to interrogate the problem and think about potential solutions that can have a real difference. Again, I wish I didn't have to end the discussion here, but I'm going to thank all of our panelists for sharing all of your work, your expertise, and your insights. And thank you to the audience for the fantastic questions and for your engagement. Again, I hope everyone here is leaving with some new insights and some takeaways to continue the conversation and think of some actions that we can work in our own organizations and in our own context. I believe CSPC will be launching a feedback poll, so please take a moment to complete that and share your thoughts. And I think they'll also be putting maybe a link in the chat, or maybe they have, about other upcoming CSPC panel and virtual events. So I encourage all of the audience members to check those out. And again, thank you, final thank you to all of our panelists, and thanks everyone for joining today.